Okay, I'm Cheryl Mackowiak, soil specialist up in the Panhandle, and one of the committee members on Rachel's research project. And so the task given to me is benefits of plant diversity and soil health. And so we'll address that a little bit, but I might take us a little astray as well. Yeah, that doesn't work. So I just want to make sure we're all on board, because you guys are all hearing about soil health. What are we really talking about? And so that we're all on the same page. So my outline is to address that a little bit, and then talk about plant diversity and its impacts on soil health in terms of plant functional groups, and we'll get into what that means. And then breaking out the natives versus the introduced plants and improved plant varieties. And then switching it a little bit, and then what do soils do that support the diversity? So you can go either direction, and just a slide or two about soils that support pollinators directly. Okay, so when I was going through the system, we talked about soil fertility and soil quality, and then we got into soil health. And so what are the differences? Soil quality, this comes from NRCS. Capacity of soil to function within its natural or managed ecosystem, to sustain productivity, enhance the water and air quality, support human and animal health and habitation. When we talk about soil fertility, it's always been plant centric. Now we're expanding soil qualities, talking also about humans that rely on plants, and animal health. Soil health, condition of the soil itself, its potential to sustain biological functions, maintain the environmental quality, and again, promote plant and animal health. So if you ask me, they're really kind of the same, except the soil health is even more biologically oriented or focused than it has been when we talk about soil quality. So even NRCS at the national site, a few years ago, I looked and they basically said they're synonymous. You can think of soil quality as the function, and soil health in terms of the whole system and the health of that. Think of it as an organism, and how well, more holistic approach. But I'm actually old school, and I like to talk about soil fertility, and you're used to seeing soil fertility as the chemical fertility. You know, what's your soil fertility? What's the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and those types of things, organic matter. But we could really break this down, quality or health, into the physical fertility, the biological fertility, and the chemical fertility, all together contribute into a healthy soil or soil health. And then below each of those headings, you see some of the things we're talking about within each one. But you know, the soil health really came, my impression is, really came online when we had the technology to really study the biology of the soil. We knew about the, you know, organisms in general, but now we've got markers, we got all these nomics, metanomics, genomics, all these things. So people have tools now. So now we can really dig in and tease apart what actually the mechanisms at a much deeper level. And so that's gotten people very excited. And so there's a lot of emphasis on that related to soil health. Okay, then a little factoids of how many of this and how many of that are in a typical handful of soil. And we've seen lots of those in the past. So NRCS, once again, they're big into this soil health, and they have a chart you might see about principles of soil health, but really they're looking at what's contributing to soil health. And in my talk today, we're talking about diversity. So you can see they have animals and everything too, but we're going to focus on the plant diversity. But that plant system, whether it's cover, so you have vegetative cover, you've got root production. These are 3 of the 4 main things they're talking about, but even the minimized disturbance, you can take a guess. What are they all really focusing on? What are they trying to really affect on that soil to say it's good soil health versus poor soil health? What do all these aspects contribute to? What's the main thing? Soil organic matter or soil carbon. So really it all boils down to, people really emphasize the soil carbon. That's some of the biggest, that's the biggest factor to really get improved soil health. at this level, and then of course you dig in deeper, and there's lots of little mechanisms and processes that you can get into, and but really it's, you know, it affects the physical fertility, it affects the physical aggregation, those types of things, infiltration, chemical, nutrient holding capacity, physical, biological. It's the energy source for the microbes in an aerobic environment. So again, the carbon, so much of the rest of the talk is going to be related to soil organic matter or soil organic carbon, talking about the carbon in the system. The other component, if we're talking about diversity, do we need 100 different species of plants in a system? It's more better. What's the limit? I think more and more folks are really focusing on functional groups. So plant functional groups, what functions do they perform? Probably could have some redundancy in a system, but you know, diversity in and of itself is probably not the goal. Even if you wanted it, it might be economically limiting. So that's how I'm approaching this. And there's a definition given out. But basically they have similar functions, similar, sometimes physiological abilities, and even phenotypes are similar sometimes. So here's a little guessing game. How many plant species do you see in this picture? There's not that many, so you should be able to get through it pretty quick. Can someone shout them out?
Counting the weeds or no?
Well, the weeds are plant out of place. So yeah, count everything. How many? What do you name them? Someone start naming them. Common names are fine. I'm not looking for crimson.
I see a sedge, I think, in the bottom left corner.
You see a sedge?
Maybe.
It's a little tiny remnant of a vetch, but
Oh, okay.
let's call it vetch for today. Anything else? There's about 3 more I see. What about the grass? What kind of grass is that? Can you tell? It's hard to tell. It's annual ryegrass. Not a lot of fertility, but close. Okay. What about the yellow flowers? What is that? It's a clover.
Looks like, I was gonna say, it looks like another clover.
Hop clover. That's hop. Hop. Thank you, forage guy. And then one more at the bottom right. Do you see something in the bottom right? Some would call it a weed, but I don't. Huh?
The little, the
Wild geranium?
Yes. Who said that? Excellent. And they have flowers too, and attract pollinators. And it's nutritious, Marcelo. So we've got 5 species. How many functional groups? My functional group for this talk are grasses, legumes, and forbs. Combined, these are dicots versus monocots, but I'll break them out here because the legumes provide the nitrogen fixing, right? So break them out separate. So we've got 5 species. How many grasses? We've got 1 grass. We had 1 forb, and we had 3 legumes. So do we need to have 5 species? Maybe not. Hmm?
What's a forb?
The forb was the wild geranium.
What is a forb?
A forb, well, it's a dicot, herbaceous. That's not a nitrogen fixer. Some people will group them all together, but pull out legumes because they serve some different purposes. So when we talk about diversity, and then I think you're part of that research group, right, with Dr. Dubé about how much diversity is required in a cover crop.
Yeah.
So
That's what they do, and Rachel also helped.
good. Okay. So you know where I'm coming from. Good. Hopefully we're kind of in agreement. Yeah.
Cheap.
Okay, so we're talking about carbon. The other big push is, okay, grow more roots, because that's what's going to contribute. Now we have above ground residues in that, but a lot of that breaks down above the surface, and so you lose a lot of that CO2 emissions, right? If you can get it under the ground, which roots are already under the ground, then more of that tends to stay where it started. So looking at the amount of roots in the architecture. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you've got the annual crops, and towards the right at the left side, you got alfalfa, and then I threw in perennial grasses because they all go in terms of depth. You can see 2 to 8 feet. Those perennial crops will tend to grow deeper, and the annual crops, you can see we got an example of wheat. Wheat's pretty fibrous root, but you know, some of these others, even corn, is not that fibrous, and they can only go maybe 3 or 4 feet. Why is that? Why is an annual crop, perennial crops where you can get 8 feet more? Here's some native grasses and dicots that can go
Cost too
15 to
much.
20 feet.
Cost too much to produce, put on roots like that.
In terms of energy,
Yeah, time, in terms of-
if you have perfect growing conditions, they have,
They would be too then, right?
Yeah.
The water would be right.
what else does a perennial system have an annual system doesn't have?
Die back and come back.
Yeah, time and money, right? And so the energy, but it's like 10 annual is only gonna grow for one season and they're gone. And in fact, sometimes some of these annuals can grow faster, roots faster than perennial systems, but they're gonna stay longer, even though they do have root turnover, but they can over time build a larger root mass in most, and not all of them, because you see there's an example of one. And this is from the temperate zone in Wisconsin, but we've got our own. I just couldn't find a example for the Florida area. But what's neat in the center, they put Kentucky bluegrass there, so you see in the middle, so lawn. If you're cutting it this time, this height all the time, the roots are gonna be this deep. So, have you heard that no mow May for lots of the country where they're trying to get pollinators, and they're actually giving their grass a break too. Let them grow a few roots before you start scalping them down again. Okay, so I keep putting up some of this information, but what feeds into that organic matter? Again, the chemistry, it buffers the pH, it holds nutrients through complexation. Not worry about pollutants, but it can have some ability there too, and binding heavy metals. Physical, the structure, of course, aggregates in that, which affects water retention and buffering soil temperature and other things, and then the whole biological processes, because that is in an aerobic system, that's the energy source. That's what the microbes are mostly feeding on. Anaerobic system, low oxygen systems, they have other methods. They're not relying on the carbon per se. And so that's why in anaerobic systems, organic matter tends to build over time. Think of peats or swampy areas. That carbon really builds nice and deep versus nicely aerated tilled areas, especially. Where is the carbon? Where does it sort of end in this picture? Can you tell, or you can't tell? You'd have to just analyze for it.
It looks about 6 inches maybe, or.
Yeah, don't overthink it. Just look at wherever it's brown or black, that's where the carbon is. Think of charcoal, right? It's just, our eyes are very good at identifying that. And the other one, if you see the soils in the panhandle, they're orangish color, that's high iron, so that's easy to see. So soil color is a pretty cool thing. And then of course, if this is in Live Oak area, there's no color to that soil below. It's just like sand below that. So okay, so kind of boring text slide, but I just really wanted to get some of these on the docket here. So I say the hypothetical or hypothesized impacts on soil carbon, biodiversity, and then total biomass. Chen and al, I have cited down there, they did a meta-analysis. It's pretty nice, and they have a whole table. If you're interested, get a copy of it, I can email it to you. About these interactions that they're looking at through dozens of reports of these types of studies. But in terms of plant diversity, soil organic carbon tends to increase with increased plant diversity and therefore root diversity. And there's some thought that it has to do with the microbial diversity. And so, chicken or egg, but the microbes are probably helping, leading some of that. That's feeding back, adding more soil carbon, and then promoting more plant growth. Higher rainfall areas tend to support greater diversity. The extremes, think of the tropical rainforests, they're extremely diverse versus some of the desert systems, not quite as diverse, but there's always exception to every rule too, but more moisture, more plant varieties. And then the impact on biomass. So higher nitrogen can lead to higher soil or organic carbon, basically because we're growing more plants or growing more roots. So excessive nitrogen could actually deplete soil organic carbon, because now you've given the microbes, you're inviting more microbes in and they're more active, and it could get carried away. So it could help, and sometimes it can hinder if you're overdoing it. Water holding capacity, greater water availability, or at least adequate moisture, will help build more soil organic carbon. And acidity, if your soils are a little more acidic, that does inhibit some microbial activity, and so that could help increase the soil organic carbon. And some forms of nitrogen you apply, it can acidify your soil some, so there's that interaction. And then you all know this about pH and soil fertility. On the low end, you can tie up certain nutrients like phosphorus, and on the high end, you tie up a lot of the micronutrients in that. So that plays a role. And if the nutrients aren't available, the biomass won't grow as much, and so you impeded some of the soil organic carbon accumulation. Okay, so taking this sort of from a pasture perspective, in terms of findings and biodiversity, in terms of plant diversity and function. In general, the grasses, annual grasses, are really capturing all their nutrients pretty much near the surface soil. And that's where most of our carbon is as well. And the problem is when you got some of these annual grasses, like annual ryegrass is a good example. And out west, they have problems with small grains, where it robs so much surface soil moisture than what they want to grow next, or whether it's pollinators or anything else, they have a lot of problems. So you got to keep that in mind. In terms of perennial grasses, they still have a lot of fibrous near the surface, but they're the best for massive root systems in terms of our herbaceous plants. And so they're going to store a lot of carbon and with depth as well. And there's something I noticed more anecdotally, working on some sod-based rotation several years ago in, it was broccoli system. It was an organic broccoli production system with Bahia grasses, the rotation. And we do respiration measurements. We'd have to have soil moisture measurements that go along with it. And we got into the late summer seasons. You can think of this also as stockpiling forages. When things they're there, it's standing biomass, but it's not doing much. It was actually holding a lot more soil moisture than the broccoli system or bare soil. Because somebody say, oh, bare soil will be okay because you'll get a crust and protect the soil. I was amazed, and it happened time and time again. And so it'd be really interesting in timing of some of these things, how some of these plants can help us with soil moisture and banking some water. So let's go to mixed planting. So that's our diversity, right? We're going to add diversity. Legumes are going to help cycle more of the cations, the base cations, calcium, magnesium, zinc, and those types of things. Brassicas, especially some of the mustards and turnips, have deep tap roots, and others have reported nitrate being pulled up several feet below the surface. So you're recycling that. You could probably, if you had potassium down there, could recycle that. Legumes provide nitrogen fixation, but you got to have the right inoculant, right? And most of these you have to re-inoculate. Some are precocious, and they will associate with various microbes that fix nitrogen, so you don't have to apply inoculant. Okay, then one of the key things is you say, oh, I got nitrogen fixers by the legumes, and I have my grasses, and it's like, I'm going to make it even better. I'm going to add more nitrogen to the system and really jump things up. Well, if you overdo it, the grasses grow faster when they have ample or optimal nitrogen compared to a legume. Legume has a lot of energy to fix that nitrogen that the grasses don't have. So it's hard pressed to find legumes that will outcompete our subtropical grasses. So you don't want to over apply nitrogen. And am I up on time or, oh, by a lot? Okay. Okay. Like 2 more minutes. Okay, greatest plant diversities in terms of improved species versus native species, the soil types. Our improved species, think of heavier soils, right? Good fertility, ample moisture. That's what they were designed to do, to really excel on that. Our pollinators, and Rachel is complaining about how cruddy some of the soil sites were. I was ecstatic. It's like, damn, this is what we want, because we're not going to have a lot of those weeds are just brought up on the same rich soils. You get poor soils, some of the weeds are not as bad as they are otherwise. Okay. And then this is what Isaac's going to get into. I conferred with him, he's going to do it, but I noticed there's some reporting on, there might be the soil actually impacting our pollinators in terms of ground bees and their nesting sites. So bare ground is one of the key items that seems a little bit more consistent. Some of these other things vary by species in that. And bottom line, more research is needed in this area so that soil, direct soil and insect interaction, it's going to be really interesting. And it's kind of a new area of research for some folks. And I'm just learning about it myself. I thought it was pretty cool. So thanks.